Hi, this is Umer and you are watching Canada View at Voice of Canada. First of all, we will discuss the top stories. A woman from British Columbia is reminding people to always keep an eye on their surroundings after too close for comfort wildlife encounter.
Melanie Porter was sitting on her porch in Quesnel this past Thursday, having a smoke and browsing TikTok when she saw something approach in the corner of her eye. It came closer and she realized it was a bear. She says she froze out of sheer panic, fearing it might hit her. Instead, the animal's licks were luscious, she says. Porter adds the bear walked in front of her and around to her right side, taking a sniff and licking her hand.
His mouth was more open and I was like, nope. And so I pulled it back and he decided to kind of back up. I must have startled him. And he went up on his hind legs and his paws were kind of crouched in. And I was like, okay, I'm going to take a snapshot. My phone is still open and on and nobody's going to believe this. It actually just feels like a dog tongue, a gigantic dog tongue, like a Newfoundland Labrador tongue. So just because this bear was friendly for a few minutes doesn't mean that all bears are friendly.
For the first time, Canada has revealed a full country-by-country list of where Canadians have been murdered abroad, with almost 200 reported as having been killed while traveling outside the country in the past 5 years.
Over the last 5 years, almost 200 Canadians have been murdered while traveling abroad, and new figures released tell us in what countries those murders took place. Global Affairs Canada says it is aware of 191 Canadians killed abroad in a total of 63 countries during that time period. Up until now, the department has provided minimal information about the specific countries those deaths occurred, citing the victims' privacy. But Global News is now able to release the information after an Access to Information appeal. The deaths range from drug-related shootings to kidnappings with the purpose of extortion, as well as killings of innocent tourists drawn to the tropics. The highest number of deaths took place in 2016 with 49 reported, followed by 45 in 2017, 39 in 2018, 31 in 2019, and 27 just last year. More Canadians have been murdered in Mexico than any other country, with 24 having been killed in the past 5 years. Of the top 5 countries where the most deaths occurred, the United States follows Mexico with 20 deaths. Jamaica, the Philippines, and the West African nation of Burkina Faso are next in descending order. On the other end of the spectrum, during that 5-year period, countries like China, Germany, and Italy each saw only 1 Canadian killed. However, the murders of Canadians can go unreported as Canada leaves it up to families to decide to go public about the murder of loved ones. Global Affairs Canada declined an interview, but in a statement to Global News said each case is unique and under the Privacy Act they take steps to remove direct and indirect information which could identify individuals. The government would also not commit to posting information online in a timely manner on Canadians murdered abroad. That is a sharp contrast between Canada and some other countries like the US, which publishes the deaths of Americans abroad from non-natural causes online, including date, location, and cause of death. Canada has a travel advisory website that provides general information on levels of risk in nations around the world, but it still refuses to release more specific details, including the cities or towns the murders of Canadians occurred in, or the circumstances surrounding the crime.
As MPs get back to work on Parliament Hill, there is a talk of a potential deal between the Liberals and the NDP. So, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's minority government can stay in power.
Gosh, it's good to see you guys.
It was the first time in nearly 18 months that these Liberal MPs had met in person, and they returned to learn about a potential Liberal-NDP deal to provide some stability to this Parliament. It might involve an NDP promise to prop up the Liberals in exchange for a legislative agenda that includes some NDP priorities.
We're committed to make this Parliament work and having constructive conversations, and we're doing that with all parties.
The chairperson of the NDP caucus said much the same.
We have always said that we will work with all the different parties. We're here to get the job done.
Though Jenny Kwan says there is no formal deal.
So contrary to the rumor mill that is out there, just to let you know that there are no agreements of any sort.
But that did not stop the Conservative leader from taking aim at what he called a radical coalition.
Canadians can't afford this coalition. The Liberal NDP coalition would be a disaster for the Canadian economy.
But Aaron O'Toole was under fire himself after some Conservative MPs voiced concerns about vaccine mandates and even suggested vaccines may not be safe or effective.
The Conservatives are actually moving backwards. More and more Conservatives are now stepping up to stand against vaccination, to stand against science.
O'Toole conceded such comments were not helpful, but he said he'd deal with those MPs internally.
And those conversations, as you know, will be confidential. That's what a team does.
The supply chain shortage is frustrating customers and merchants around the world, with everything from cars to toys low in the stock.
A global shortage of microchips has hit the Stellantis auto plant in Windsor hard, shutting down shifts more than once. It's not alone. The pandemic has sparked the worst crisis in supply chains the world has seen. From cars to clothes to toys. Container ships are stacked up at ports. There aren't enough drivers to transport goods, and widespread shortages will hit shoppers this Christmas. Climate researchers say it's about time supply chains are in the economic spotlight because so much of what the globalized economy produces contributes to greenhouse gases.
About 90 to 95% of their emissions, meaning that their total emissions, is actually coming from their supply chain.
In short, the carbon from your car isn't limited to what comes out of the tailpipe. It starts with the mining of raw materials from all over the world, steel and plastics to lithium and cobalt. The materials are shipped, the cars are manufactured, parts are made and transported, the workers commute to plants, and more shipping to car dealerships that use energy. Then you drive the car off the lot, burning fossil fuels, and eventually a car must be disposed of. Every link in the supply chain expands the carbon footprint and affects climate.
Many of the industry players, many of the buyers of materials are starting to do those accounts and think about, well, what is that footprint and what is the total carbon that adds up?
Canada, a major trading nation, is deeply interwoven with supply chains, not just what comes here, but businesses that export oil, lumber, food, as well as finished products.
Most of their climate impact is coming from the supply chain in both directions.
A first step, says MIT's John Sturman, is for companies to accurately report their emissions. Critics say some are greenwashing, not really accounting for carbon impacts up and down the supply chain, and customers are none the wiser.
I don't know how it got here, but somehow or another it showed up on my doorstep and I'm happy.
One response is to buy local, but consumers can also ask more questions.
Where do their products come from and what is the impact of those products?
The pandemic has heightened awareness of our precarious globalized economy, but it's an awareness that is putting supply chains under long overdue scrutiny for their contributions to climate change.
With the deadline to join a class action lawsuit against the Canadian Armed Forces over sexual misconduct fast approaching, the number of claimants is ballooning.
It's very emotional, first of all.
Sam Samplonius and the group It's Not Just 700 are helping those who suffered military misconduct navigate the class action claims process, and PTSD can make that more difficult.
It causes a lot of anxiety. So for some people, they've been putting it off and putting it off. And now, of course, with the deadline looming as for November 24th, there's a lot of people that are going, well, okay, I guess I don't have any choices. If I'm going to do it, I need to do it.
She's not surprised to see a boost in applications ahead of the deadline. The class action opened to claims in May of 2020. By December of that year, there were nearly 3,000. We last checked in July when they spiked to well over 7,000. 4 months later, there are now more than 13,600 claims and counting.
There's more than enough time. They should feel really free and welcome to reach out to us so we can help them as best we can.
Andrew Astridis is one of a dozen lawyers across the country representing class action members. He wants people to know the process is confidential, independent, and the class action includes a wide range of sexual misconduct and gender discrimination eligible for compensation.
There's a presumption that when class members make their claim, that their claims are in good faith and that they're honest. So class members don't need to worry about people questioning them about what happened or doubting what they're putting forward.
And in last, during the First World War, hundreds of black Canadians eagerly signed up for duty, but the military rejected them because they were not white. So they went on to form the only all-black battalion in the history of the Canadian Armed Forces.
600 black soldiers who sailed from Halifax Harbour in 1917, sharing the voyage to England with white troops. The men felt the sting of racism every day, but especially after trying to enlist in the war effort.
When the black young men arrived, they were told, "This is not your war, it's a white man's war." They were turned away.
Eventually, they formed the No. 2 Construction Battalion, known as the Black Battalion, the only segregated military unit in Canadian history. As it turned out, they did play a crucial part in the war, building rail lines, trenches, and bridges for the soldiers they wanted to fight alongside.
When you look at the remarkable aspect of those men wanting to serve when they really weren't wanted, as we commonly say here, they had to fight for the right to fight. That took a lot of inner strength.
For decades, their unique story was forgotten. But advocates and descendants mounted their own determined effort. First, dignifying derelict grave markers. Then, for a wider acknowledgement of their ancestors and the racism they encountered. The federal government is now planning a public apology for next July.
That apology needs to be one of those times when folks from across the country, folks from the U.S., folks from the West Indies can all come together to celebrate the No. 2 Construction Battalion. And that's part of what makes it a meaningful apology.
We've developed a website that features a list of all of the men that enlisted, that individuals can search from across Canada and say, look, is there anyone in my family lineage that's been a part of the No. 2?
Organizers are pursuing other forms of acknowledgement, like scholarships, and including the Black Battalion in school history classes, making their courageous struggle part of Canada's shared narrative.
It was Canada View. For further updates regarding Canada, Montreal and Quebec, you can visit our website voiceofcanada.tv. Keep watching Voice of Canada.